Aberdeen and architecture go together like mince and tatties. Or haggis and neeps. Or haggis and whiskey. Or whiskey and more whiskey. We're so lucky that in this city, all we need to do is look up to find there's art at every turn. And I'm not talking about new art. Aberdeen's buildings are the artistic legacy of its world-class architects, and in this video, I'm going to list my top 5 picks of the best of them. And for fun, I'm also going to pick 5 of Aberdeen's worst buildings as a contrast, because we certainly have our share of carbuncles. So, without further ado, let's take a look.
Round 1.
The Northern Assurance Company headquarters was designed by A. Marshall Mackenzie in 1885, but most know it by its colloquial name, the Monkey House. Nobody really knows why it's called that. For as long as I can remember, the ground floor was a pub that took that name officially. They really played up to the name with the interior decor. It's now a Thai restaurant called, however you say this. It's a beautiful building with spades of dressed granite, ornamentation, and the iconic Doric pillars at the entrance. The interior remains well kept with lush wooden panels and even more granite. What's not to love about this iconic building, marking the start of this countdown at number 5 on my list? Sir Robert Keith of Benham, brother to the Earl Marshal, founder of Marischal College, built this striking and unique building for himself as a townhouse circa 1610 on the Nether Kirkgate. But it was later in its life, after Benham's death, that this building got its nickname, the Wallace Tower, from the figurine that stands in its alcove in the corner. It was demolished in 1963 to make way for redevelopment in the area, mainly accommodating construction of Marks and Spencer's new building. But it was the first in a series of works which ultimately destroyed St Nicholas Street and much of the Loch Street area to make way for the St Nicholas Centre and Bon Accord Centre, which remain today. All that's left to mark these buildings are these blocks now integrated into the Bon Accord Centre car park. They are from the original Northern Corp headquarters, built in 1905 before it moved to Norco House, now John Lewis. But you can't just sweep away listed buildings. Marks and Spencer offered to fund the relocation of the building in order to preserve it, which was good enough for the town council at the time to give them the go-ahead. The plaque on Carnegie's Brae reads, "Through the generosity of Lord Marks, the corporation were enabled to remove the building and re-erect it in its original form, where it is preserved for posterity." But what stands today is a bizarre distortion of the original building. I don't know how you could convince me that this is a stone-for-stone reconstruction. More like someone's attempt to create it from memory, after seeing a picture of it once. I'm not alone. Edward Meldrum describes it as a replica building incorporating some of the stonework and features of the demolished townhouse, which sounds much more accurate to me. It stands today at the edge of Seaton Park in Tillydrone. This other landmark, Downey's Cairn, which once stood at Bury Den, is sited nearby. Maybe the council at one point wanted to use this area as a dumping ground for inconvenient historical artefacts, the same way they use Duthie Park today. I don't know. Maybe they were trying to make this area a tourist trap at one point. This guy looks as unimpressed as I am.
Round 2.
I really wanted to include a church building on this list, simply because Aberdeen has such a wealth of beautiful kirks. I could do an entire video on these, but I feel like it would be a long one. The number of kirks and the beauty of the architecture of each one of them is a testament to the role faith has played in Aberdonian lives over the years. It was hard to pick a favourite, but I think the Gilcomston on Union Street tips the scales for me. It's a fairly unique building with lots of ornamentation, window features and stained glass. It's sandstone construction in contrast to the regular granite of the rest of Union Street. It was built in 1868 by William Smith to accommodate the United Free Church's largest congregation when it moved to the site from Huntley Street. At a time when a lot of Aberdeen's church buildings have been converted into flats or nightclubs, Gilcomston remains in use with an independent congregation. This once beautiful 19th century theatre, opened under the name of the Palace, has quite the history. It was converted to a cinema in 1931 and later changed to a ballroom in 1959. But it existed in infamy in my student days as Liquid Nightclub. Older revellers will remember it as Fusion or Ritzy's, and younger generations may have known it as Institute or Attic. What earns the building a place on this list has nothing to do with its design, but rather its erosion during its tenure as a nightclub since 1976. These bricked arches surely mark what would have been great windows. The building's lines are elaborate and grand. Imagine it in its heyday competing with His Majesty's Theatre and the Tivoli, or even in the 30s as one of Aberdeen's many lost cinemas. It may seem strange now, but the early 20th century saw the opening of many small independent cinemas across the country, and Aberdeen had its fair share. At least 19 by my count, not including cinemas that existed on the same site. Including the ABC on Union Street, which is now View Cinema, accessed from Ship Row. Queen's Cinema on Union Street, most recently Espionage Nightclub. The Picture House on Union Street, now just shop units. The Majestic on Union Street, now demolished but would have stood where Pret-a-Manger, Pret-a-Manger? The Majestic on Union Street, now demolished but would have stood where French Starbucks is now. But a building of similar design survives 2 doors down to give us an idea of what it could have been like. The Capitol on Union Street, whose frontage survives but is now an office block behind. The Playhouse, now demolished on Union Street but would have stood where Holborn House is now. The Odeon on Justice Mill Lane, now a health club. City Cinema on George Street. The frontage is now just shop units, but the complex behind was demolished to accommodate the new Hilton Hotel on St Andrew Street. Royal Cinema on John Street, which is now the Mither Tap. Grand Central on George Street, now demolished, but would have been where these shop units and Grampian Housing Association flats above now stand. Cosmo 2 on Diamond Street, which is now an empty husk of a building being used as a car park. Cinema House on Skene Terrace, which most will probably remember as the Forum. Globe Picture Playhouse on Nelson Street, which is now Atmosphere Lighting and Sound. The Kingsway on King Street, which is now a bingo. The Astoria in Kitty Brewster, now this late 60s designed shopping centre. Woodside Electric in Woodside, originally an ice rink, has either been derelict or operating low-key for as long as I can remember. Casino on Wales Street, now demolished, but the building would have centred on the rear car park of these low-rise flats on what is now Beach Boulevard. Star Picture Palace on Park Street would have backed onto Casino. They were both owned by the same proprietor who had hoped to join them up in some way. Both were swept away when the area was redeveloped. And the Torrey Picture House on Crombie Road, now demolished and occupied by Crombie Court. And finally, the Belmont, which was a cinema between 1910 and 1953, but reopened as a cinema in the year 2000.
Round 3.
Designed in 1840 for the North of Scotland Banking Company, which eventually became Clydesdale Bank, this building is a fine example of the work of its venerable architect, Archibald Simpson. It spent much of the last century in its intended use as a bank, but was converted to a Wetherspoon pub in 1996. Diane Morgan has said, "One cannot help but notice Victorian banks and insurance companies that are converted into pubs retain their magnificent interiors." And in typical Wetherspoon style, this is the case here. Named the Archibald Simpson, although locally we just call it Archie's, it commemorates one of Aberdeen's most famous architects. Archibald was born at 15 Guest Row, just around the corner, a street that doesn't really exist anymore. The only remnant really is this block of buildings out of line with the rest of Broad Street. He is currently buried in the town's St Nicholas graveyard, and in between his time at these two residences, he left his mark in a great number of excellent buildings up and down the country. I have to admit, personal bias has tipped the scales for this building for me. As a student, many years before Tim Martin's hijinks gave Wetherspoon the dubious reputation it has today, I spent many an occasion dropping in here for a cheap steak dinner and some nice but exceedingly reasonably priced ale with good company. Hangovers installed and serviced indeed. I'm glad that the original design for this building was rejected. It certainly fits in with the rest of Union Street, but the Doric columns and the sculpture of Ceres, the Roman goddess of agriculture, really set this building apart. It would make a fine candidate for the centrepiece of Aberdeen's city centre, and geographically, at the nexus of Union Street and King Street, it arguably is. It is the early 2000s. The night is cold, and the queue is long outside the entrance to Exodus nightclub. I have nothing to do while I wait for bouncers to click me in, but make small talk with the people around me and look around. Immediately to the right of the queue behind the railing is a barren patch of land belonging to a derelict building. There's not much of the building left, only one wall, and behind it, a landmark of Aberdeen. The freestanding spire marking the site of what was once the Triple Kirks, the namesake of the pub to the left. It has been like this for as long as memory serves, and the same questions enter my head that always do when queuing to get into this place. How long has it been like this? How long will it continue to be like this? Will anything ever be done here, or is the site relegated to be in perpetuity a crumbling shell of a building? What even was the Triple Kirks? Why would anyone build 3 churches in one place? Were they all built at the same time, or was it a series of extensions? Was it one church which split into 3 congregations, and why? If the pub to the left was one church, and this wall was the other church, where was the third? And why are they now in ruins? Why did one survive? The origin of the Triple Kirks is entangled in the disruption of 1843, which resulted in the forming of the Free Church of Scotland, breaking away from the Church of Scotland. This new denomination of the church caused a sudden demand for new buildings for the dissenting congregations across the country. The Church of St Nicholas East, St Nicholas West, and the South Church on Belmont Street were all among the congregations that broke away, requiring their own digs. The result was the Archibald Simpson 1844 design of 3 churches to house 3 congregations, all sharing a common centre spire. To keep costs down, bricks used in construction were recycled from older buildings in the area that had been demolished. However, the railway line built close to the site in 1864 made the congregation of the West Church of the Triple Kirks wary of possible collapse, and they moved to a different site. The North Church, whose gable end can be seen here, was demolished in the 1980s as it was considered dangerous due to the building's dilapidation. Only the East Church remains, but it remains a lovely looking building. So why is it on this list? Well, it's not the East Church that's the problem. It's what they've done with the site. The new student accommodation is grotesquely oversized and not in keeping with its surroundings whatsoever. It hides the landmark spire that everyone knows from almost every angle. Only the very top pokes out, and the rest can mostly only be seen from a narrow viewing angle on Union Terrace. The work carried out on the spire to structurally reinforce it looks like it's been an afterthought, garishly cemented over. As for this thing, I have no idea what they were thinking. What you're seeing here is rust. No, genuinely, it's not a finish, it's actually rusted metal, now beginning to stain the stone underneath. I wonder how many students in the years to come will be deprived of my experience. Their wandering thoughts won't be consumed by the enigmatic ruins of the Triple Kirks on their droll wait for admission. I'd like to think maybe they could dwell on the equally enigmatic menu of the Tasty Tatty, and what their post-revelry food will be instead. But the Tatty is gone, so we can't even do that these days.
Round 4.
The former head post office building has a presence on Crown Street and on D Street. It was built close to the turn of the century and then converted into flats at the turn of the next century. Easily missed, hidden away down Crown Street, it is, in my opinion, one of the most elaborately beautiful buildings in the city. Every facade is furnished with highly dressed features and adorned with graven embellishments, all made from Kemnay granite. One might wonder, from its layout, if it had been a building of more conventional design extended over the years, but the finish is far too consistent. It wouldn't be out of place with a title of castle in an estate in the middle of the country, so great its stature. But its purpose is clearly engraved above the entrance. Aberdeen University opened their new library building in 2011. It was named the Sir Duncan Rice Library a year later when it was officially opened by Her Majesty the Queen. The building is named after the principal of the school at the time the project was conceived. It comprises a glass box that showcases some of the least appealing shades of green that I can imagine. Apparently, the pattern is supposed to look like granite when viewed under a microscope, but I don't see it. Once you strip away the queasy green pattern, you're left with a building not dissimilar from any other utilitarian modern office block. From the outside, at least. It has to be one of the most Marmite buildings in the city. I know as many people who love it as who hate it. And while I respect artistic creativity and recognise the merit in expressionism, I'm of the firm opinion that when it's the public who have to look at the thing day in and day out, and the public purse is involved, divisive works of art are probably not appropriate. The best photo I have been able to capture is this one, from back in the days when orange sodium lights caused less green to be visible at night. The architect went on to design the Halifax Public Library in Nova Scotia, another glass box design, this time with a clashing colour scheme. What do you think of it? All of the works in my top 5 have survived at least 100 years and stood the test of time. I wonder how many of his works will survive the next 50.
Final round.
The 5th Earl Marshal of Aberdeen, laterally the 4th Earl Marshal of Aberdeen, yes, that's right, was apparently a bit of a green-eyed individual. He regarded that the lonely neighbouring town of Old Aberdeen was home to a university in King's College, and yet his new town, which is actually older than Old Aberdeen, did not. To add to his lament, his rival, Sir Alexander Fraser, had just established a university in the town of Fraserburgh in 1592. It was to the benefit of both him and the town council of the time that, after the Reformation, Greyfriars Monastery was going vacant and would site a new university well. The result was that Aberdeen would have as many universities as the whole of England at the time. But those buildings of Greyfriars, and even the ones that came after, are long since torn down now. Our good acquaintance Archie Simpson pops his head up one last time in this video to give us the grand buildings of Marischal College that stand today. Most of them anyway, built between 1837 and 1844. Most of the college is of his design. But the splendid frontage that we see on Broad Street is a later addition in 1905 by Alexander Marshall Mackenzie. And that's his second mention in this video. I think I might have favourites. A whole street had to be demolished to make this happen, but I don't think anyone's arguing it was worth it. The building, which currently belongs to Aberdeen University, was renovated and the granite treated in 2011 to house Aberdeen City Council's offices as they moved out of St Nicholas House across the road. Before that, and for as long as I can remember, the buildings were in partial use by the university, most notably hosting exams. Putting the campus to good use is probably one of the best moves the City Council have made. Unfortunately, the part of the frontage which is Greyfriars Kirk was not treated at the time, but recently this work seems to have begun. The kirk has laid empty for a long time now. I will be interested to see what use it is put to in the years to come. Aberdonians like to throw around two facts about Marischal College. One is that it was Adolf Hitler's favourite building in Britain. Sometimes this tale is elaborated that he planned to make it his headquarters in Britain or some such. The other fact is that it is the second biggest granite building in the world. There doesn't seem to be any evidence to back up claims that this was Hitler's favourite building, sadly.
Mein Führer, was Sie da sagen ist ungeheuerlich. Die Generalität ist der Geschmolz des deutschen Volkes.
And the latter begs the question, what is the largest granite building in the world? Well, turns out this monstrous monastery in Spain. Good thing too, imagine the rates if Marischal College was this size. I don't think anyone can argue this sits fittingly at number 1 in my top 5. The only thing that distracts from it is Carl Pilkington once said, "You're better off living in the hole, looking at the palace, than living in the palace, looking at the hole."
Point proven. You're better off living in the hole, looking at the palace, than living in the palace, looking at the hole, aren't you?
Sited just across from the magnificent edifice of Marischal College, Marischal Square residents enjoy not only a great view, but also enviable rent holidays at the taxpayer's expense. Built between 2015 and 2017 under objection from the public, opposition councillors and hundreds of protesters, the building offers 166,000 square feet of mostly office space in a city where even before lockdown, available office space vastly outstripped demand following the 2014 oil crash. It's a largely unremarkable building, if somewhat inappropriately oversized to the detriment of the area as a whole. There's just enough deviation from a completely utilitarian glass box design that it looks like the designers almost grudged being asked to use their creativity, and like late homework, the result just scraped a passing grade. Still, it could look worse. So, what has earned it the unenviable spot at number 1 on my worst list? Well, for context, let's go back to the early 2010s, when the decision to demolish St Nicholas House had been made, freeing up a large area right in the heart of the city. And let's think about what I would want my council to do with this newly available land. Consideration number 1. There is a significant oversupply of office space in the city already, and number 2, retail in this part of the town is not in high demand, as evidenced by the empty units in the Bon Accord and St Nicholas centres. Those malls aren't struggling, but there's always a few units spare. It's been a good few years since I've seen either fully occupied at this point. Everyone seems to love the spacious retail units, upper floor restaurant plaza, and ample parking of Union Square, a concept that would require a lot of acreage to replicate elsewhere. And number 3. Sir Ian Wood's proposition to raise the Denburn Valley got the public thinking about what they would do with the space once it was flattened. It was a solution looking for a problem, but when folks got their thinking caps on, potential was realised. The Christmas market blocked off Union Terrace every year, causing general traffic chaos throughout the busy shopping month of December. Jazz on the Green and various other attempts to host music events showed a keen public interest for outdoor entertainment. Several streets were home to occasional markets, including Belmont Street and Thistle Street, and there was a desire to try establishing a European-style cafe culture with outdoor dining, but nowhere suitable to host it. Belmont Street certainly isn't. And so, Aberdeen was suddenly very envious of the likes of George Square, which would be perfect to accommodate all this and more, and as luck would have it, a site perfect for such a civic square had just opened up. In other words, you'd need to be an idiot to throw away the rare opportunity to give Aberdeen this space to use, and instead build another office block. But that is exactly what the council did. Why? The council's finance convener at the time is quoted as saying that the additional income from the development could help protect frontline services for years to come. The council has been less than forthcoming with hard data regarding the scheme's actual or projected profitability, but the somewhat complex financial arrangement with the contractor Muse initially obfuscated the cost it would have to the taxpayer. In short, Muse Developments paid Aberdeen City Council £9 million for the site and fronted the cost of construction at £107 million. That sounds good so far. But Aberdeen City Council became head tenant on completion of the project and is liable for the rent of £5 million per year, with the hope that sufficient occupancy of the building, incoming rents from the tenants will offset this and provide positive revenue. The council takes full risk of covering this annual rent for the 35-year duration of the contract, meaning we will have paid Muse Developments £175 million in that time. Now, presently, in its third year, the building is only 75% occupied and has had to offer generous rent holidays in order to achieve that figure, with many of the occupants only relocating from existing offices in Aberdeen to take advantage of some free rent on the taxpayer's coin, leaving even more empty buildings in Aberdeen in their wake. And that's good for no one. It's unclear what occupancy rate needs to actually be achieved in order for the scheme to draw positive revenue, but I've seen prospective figures in the high 80s thrown about, and those estimates assume that full rent is being taken, with no rent holidays. The group behind the Marshall Square protests have run the numbers and estimate that the scheme has cost the taxpayer £18 million between rents and operational costs so far. Councillor Bolton reported to the press in 2015 that the development is not going to be developed unless we have signed leases, which we are doing very well on. While council leader Jenny Leng at the time claimed the building could deliver £100 million in profit. Subsequent Freedom of Information requests have revealed that the council officers have no idea where the councillors got these figures. While another councillor at the time, Willie Young, tried to claim there would be a £100 million penalty if the scheme was cancelled, which was completely inaccurate. Now, these actions seem to me to be designed to mislead a public that, according to an Evening Express poll at the time, was 87% against the development going ahead. Kevin Stewart, MSP at the time, said, "The people of Aberdeen are crying out for this to be an open space, a civic square, but those who are meant to represent them are not listening." He went on to say, "According to the campaigners, Aberdeen taxpayers will be underwriting the risk of under-occupancy of the development by guaranteeing £175 million to Aviva shareholders over 35 years. It has been said by a great number of folk that Aberdeen City Council are willing to take on a risk that a multinational insurance company is not prepared to underwrite. The small area in front of the development, now shared between pedestrians and buses, where Broad Street used to be, is the new location for the Christmas market, which is much diminished in scale to get it to fit. I'm guessing they can't use Union Terrace after pedestrianising Broad Street, as there's no other suitable route to take the traffic. So that's something else we're going to miss from now on as well. Whether Marshall Square will ever turn a profit or continue to be a financial burden to the taxpayer is anyone's guess. A lot can happen in the next 35 years, but I am sure that in 35 years we will regard this building with as little admiration as we did for its predecessor, and be just as keen to demolish it.
You lose.
So there you go, my top 5 best and worst buildings in Aberdeen. As I said at the beginning of the video, architecture is a form of art.
What? It's not even scratch and sniff.
And art is subjective.
One art, please.
So this has definitely been an opinion piece. And even if you like this thing, I can respect your opinion. I've been quite open with my biases throughout the video. Sometimes my reasons for disliking these buildings are rooted in reasons nothing to do with their aesthetic, like a gross waste of potential. And sometimes my reasons for liking them are biased by things like happy memories of good times shared in good company. And hopefully after lockdown, we can return to them and make many more. What are your favourite places in Aberdeen? Leave a comment below.